Katie Pumphrey, ultramarathon swimmer and artist. And you just recently swam from Chesapeake Bay to the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. Your latest accomplishment, big accomplishment. What initially inspired you to take up swimming? Was it something that you always wanted to do when you were younger?
Yeah, I've always been a swimmer. I joined my first swim team when I was 5, summer league team, and then at the end of the summer, I wanted to keep swimming, and my mom got me onto a year-round club team through the Y, and eventually we moved, and I joined the Monocacy Aquatic Club, and part of USA Swimming, and did year-round club swimming most of, all of growing up, and then swam in high school, and ran cross country and track, and really enjoyed high school sports. And then I decided to go to art school and study painting, and made that choice between really diving in on art and wanting to go to the Maryland Institute College of Art and study painting. And in that decision, then I didn't swim collegiately, which was a hard choice, but the right one at the time, especially, and I'm glad I did it. But doing that, studying painting and being in an art school that didn't have a lot of, really didn't have any sports, I was always gravitating towards, athletes and people in my school that had done sports. And I was, at the time, throughout college, lifeguarding, teaching some lessons, teaching a water aerobics at the Y, and started coaching like a pre-swim team, which was awesome. And throughout that time, I was swimming and training by myself. And so, right after college, I wanted a goal. I'm definitely a goal-oriented person, and signed up for. I kind of was looking into what do I want to do. I had done some like 5K runs and 10K runs, and very it was fun, but didn't light that fire. So I was looking for what is a swim I can train for, and that's kind of how I started finding more about open water swimming. And so in 2010 was my first official open water swim. I did the Chesapeake Bay swim, which starts from right where I started my swim here, the state of Baltimore. The Chesapeake Bay swim starts at the Sandy Point State Park. It's a 4.4-mile swim to the eastern shore. So you swim between the spans of the Bay Bridge, which is like the coolest swim ever. That swim's been around, I think, almost 30 years or more, and every year about 600 swimmers do that swim. So people come from all over to do that swim, and it's just 24 miles away from here in Baltimore. So that's really where my open water story started. And that swim is it's not a beginner swim. It is rough, it's choppy. And so my first swim in 2010, it was just so hard, and I finished. I remember hugging my mom, and I said, that's the hardest thing I've ever done. I want to do it. I want to do it again. So the next year in 2011, I signed up again. I also signed up and did a 7.5-mile swim from basically Virginia to Maryland. So the mouth of the Potomac River into the bay. So it's a 7.5-mile swim in the Potomac across. And that swim was in 2011 was my first longer swim with kayak support. So getting into longer distances, the bay, there's 600 swimmers. They have a lot of boat support and safety out on the water, but it's, you're more like just alone swimming and scouting the route and buoys and things like that. But for the Potomac swim, that 7.5-mile swim, I had actually 2 kayakers. Both of my brothers kayaked for me for that swim. And then you have more of like a team element. Then
was it just you that? Sorry, was it just you that was swimming then during that race or during that swim?
Yeah, they're put together like races. I always tend to, the longer the swims get, the more I just call them a swim, because safe and successful finish is the goal. But for that was a small field, so maybe like 25 swimmers. They all had their own kayakers. So my brothers Chris and Sean kayaked for me, and I just really liked that team feeling and the strategy that came with that. So, and that was just like a really tough swim, and yeah, I learned a lot. So I did that swim a few more times, and then started putting my sights on longer. And I was actually doing that swim again in 2013 when I was about halfway, and I started talking to myself and thinking like, I want to do the English Channel. So that's really
So that's where it popped in your mind.
yeah. And
You had that feeling like during the swim that you wanted to go even further distance.
yeah, I remember finishing and thinking like, I want to swim back to the other side again. So I did that.
It wasn't enough for you, right?
Yeah, yeah. Figuring out that so getting into open water is just like that love affair was instant, and then the more I did it, the more the further distances is really what lights a fire for me, and I just love that aspect of the team, and also that especially going from one point to another, how much strategy comes into play because of currents and winds, and how much you're really trusting your crew to scout that course, and yeah, so that's kind of the beginning of my swimming story.
And I assume like each swim is different, right? Like you mentioned the English Channel, so it's like I would imagine just the geography and like you kind of mentioned the climate and all of that.
Yeah, and even one of the cool things about open water, and part of why I love the sport so much, is you can do the same swim over and over and over again. You could do it every day, and it's always going to be different. So I know open water swimmers around the world that swim open water every morning, and the same stretch of water, and it's different every time because the water is different, the weather is different, the wind, the sun, how things feel. So and that's part of why I like revisiting swims I've done before, because it's going to be different every time.
And is the goal each time to go back and kind of PR that course, if you will?
Yeah, so PR is kind of a weird thing in open water, really, because like I said, it's different every time. So if you do the base swim one year and you do the base swim the next year, the first year it could have been low wind and the current was in your favor, you were getting a push. Maybe even you got a tailwind, the wind is like pulsing you in towards the finish. And then the next year, maybe it's completely the opposite and it's cold and dark, like, cloudy. And there's all these things that make it just a completely different swim. So I think it's also sometimes, you are faster and you are stronger, but the conditions are harder. So I was definitely swimming at a faster pace my second English Channel swim. I was certainly faster and stronger and more consistent, but the conditions were significantly harder. And I did swim it faster than the first time I did in 2015, but you still look at that time. It's 14 hours 19 minutes the first time I swam it, 13 hours and 44 minutes the second time I swam it. But I was significantly faster, on pace to be under 12 hours. But then the wind picked up and added a few miles, at the end, and a lot more time. So I think with PR, in open water, it's just so hard to say, because even if you do the same swim year after year or month after month, the conditions are always different. So, I talk to a lot of open water swimmers and swimmers I coach that, they'll say, oh, well, my best, 10K time is, 2 hours and 30 minutes. And then they do another 10K, say that 2 hours and 30 minutes was in a lake with no waves, no chop, wind in your favor, and then you compare it to a 10K ocean swim. Like that's really hard to say. Oh no, well now this is I PR'd in 10K because it's just a different swim. So that's like even comparing the same swim is comparing different swims is certainly harder PR wise. So I would compare it to running, right? Like a track runner running a mile on a track. It's not exactly fair to then compare a mile trail running, right? Where you're having hills and trees and rocks and boulders and they're related. Obviously, it's in the same family of sport, but very different. So open water, I think, is even within itself, oceans to lakes to rivers to bays to things that are current assisted to, changing tides and really timing and strategy. So I think that's one of the cool things about this sport and part of why I love it so much is that there is so many elements and literally elements. You're talking nature. So, I think it's a really fun sport in that way, but I also think, in kind of the PR, best time kind of language of sports, I think it makes, it makes maybe swimmers really appreciate what they're doing a little more. You can just be in the moment. And that's why I always tell my swimmers and friends, a finish is the goal, right? A safe, successful finish is the goal. It's cool to get in the first place. And it's certainly fun to race, and I like doing shorter swims and really racing some swimmers, but, it's fun to be on a podium, but, that's not necessarily the biggest piece of the sport.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I'm a avid runner, and so when I do a marathon or half marathon, people always say to do PR, and I'm like, well, it's a different city, different season, the weather, all that kind of factors in. And, especially when you're training, because I live in Florida, so it's always hot. So I won't train through the summer. But what happens is I'm always as long as it doesn't rain, pouring rain, I'm good.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm sure it's probably the same way for swimming, right? I'm sure you don't want to be swimming when it's pouring hard rain out there and the wind and all those elements. But I assume sometimes then you just have to, do you ever postpone due to weather a run that you've been planning? I mean, not a run, a swim that you've been planning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely with heavy rain. So in any body of water, swimmers or even, recreational swimmers, we try to avoid swimming in open water, any open water, after a heavy rain. So it's always, the concept of dry days is pretty common in open water swimming. So I definitely have had swims, pushed back, postponed, canceled due to heavy rain because of runoff issues, and that could be that's at the beach, at the ocean, at a lake, at a river. Runoff issues come from not only cities and everything that's into a sewer system or rainwater system, but also from farms. And so kind of no matter where you are, there's runoff can certainly be an issue. And so also swimming places that are, also being regularly tested for that. And then also with heavy rain, you're also getting a lot more, debris in the water. And, so it's a lot of safety elements that come into play with water conditions. And then I've also had a lot of swims postponed or canceled, of course, due to the weather. So one of the biggest things in picking a day is wind, huge. And so swims like the English Channel and this swim, the Bay to Baltimore swim, you tend to choose more of a window based on the tide. So for my Bay to Baltimore swim, I had a 4 to 5 day window. So in the weeks leading up, I knew I was going to hopefully swim within that window, but we didn't know what day until a few days before. So then a few days before, we're really looking at not only the weather and staying outside of heavy rains and making sure it's a dry day, but also at a lower wind. So wind can certainly, make things a lot more choppy, a lot more aggressive, and they can really make it hard for your safety vessels, kayakers, and boats to navigate. So a lot of the times, swimmers will look out at water, and say, oh, well, that looks fun, I can swim in that rough water, but then it maybe it's challenging for kayakers to navigate. And it's not because, they're not kayaking at full kayaker pace, they're kayaking at swimmer pace. So that's a lot more tippy. And, no matter what you're doing, you really want, you can't do these swims without safety element and that team supporting you. So, certainly, weather plays a huge factor in these.
How do you train then? I mean, obviously, like the Baltimore one, you could because you live locally, but something like the English Channel, how do you train for that then? Do you just train in the waters at home and hope that it can somewhat replicate what you would be facing, abroad?
Yeah, so I definitely try to get in open water as much as I can, and in working up towards my first English Channel swim, within my season, and really I was very focused for 2 years training for that. So within that, I kind of planned. I did a few other swims that would have similar conditions or similar distance, similar time, or at least a percentage of it that's really helping me prepare. But a majority of my training happens in the pool. Living in Maryland, and it's awesome that we can get in open water more. here locally, which I'm really excited to keep doing that. But again, like I said, you need safety people, right? You need a crew, you need at least a kayaker, someone watching you, especially in waterways like in Baltimore, where it's a working port, it's a busy harbor, so you can't just go and get in. So I really didn't do any training in Baltimore Harbor here. I did 2 swims, really just to document a bunch that we could announce the swim. And most of my training was in a pool, and that's obviously I can go to the pool by myself. So you don't need to have so much coordinated. And the way that I train and the way that I coach my swimmers is, in the distance that I'm preparing for, I'm trying to kind of match that distance in a week with some big swims that might hit about half that in a day. So for the Bay to Baltimore swim, where I was, a 24-mile swim, I was anticipating, 12 to 14 hours or so. It ended up being, right under 14 hours. It was 13 hours, 54 minutes. But in that, it's like I'm trying to be prepared that I could keep swimming for 15, 16, 17 hours. So time really becomes the bigger factor versus distance. And within my training days in the pool, I'm not just swimming like 3 hours straight mindlessly. So that's where I really believe in quality over quantity, and training smart and efficient to be the fastest and strongest you can possibly be. So my workouts are more interval based, and so I'll do kind of like a big warm up. I have a little preset that gets your heart rate up, and then kind of maybe 2 main sets, or like an A and a B set that with some breaks and time for water and a little snack. And within that set, not only working on kind of overall endurance and speed, but like the ability to really control pace. So a lot of the ways I write workouts and advise swimmers is getting really comfortable holding a pace that feels just a little harder than comfortable, right? But still also being able to tap into more levels, right, of speed, because you never know when things are going to pick up and get harder in these swims. And for this Bay to Baltimore swim, the current was the most against me from hour 11 through 13. So I was already the most fatigued when it got the hardest.
Is there ever a point like during a swim where you're like, I just want to give up and just be done? I'm just exhausted. Because I know, like having run a marathon, I always say like the hardest part is like mile 18 through 24, because you've run 18, your legs are starting to feel numb. But then when you get to 24, you kind of get 2 miles left. So it's like, all right, I know I can do this at that point. But it's like that sweet spot of just where you're in pain. You're like, what did I do this? Why did I, go through all the training and everything to get to this point to be just punished for 6 miles of the 26.2?
Yes, and that's I try to like tell as many jokes to my crew as possible. So sometimes I know I've said to my husband Joe, like, whose idea was this? Oh, it was mine. That's terrible. I mean, it's an emotional roller coaster the whole time. I think in the beginning, I always really aim to stay as calm as possible. I mean, the whole time I feel like I try to stay calm. I always say I try to keep my emotional meter at neutral, not get too excited. Especially when I feel like, oh, I'm crushing it. My pace is great. I feel awesome. Because you never know what wave is going to smack you in the face. And then you're like, oh, right, I still have hours to go. And then the same thing, it's like when you get that negative and you're like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable. Things hurt so much. That land over there is not getting any closer. And that's also, I really try not to look forward all that much. I also try not to look back all that much. This Bay to Baltimore swim, though, I could see land, and I knew my landmarks so well. So that was also very frustrating, because I was like, okay, I know that this is a lot, mile 12. Yeah, okay, okay, don't think about that. But yeah, I think I struggle different times. A lot of my swims recently have started in the dark. So with any swim, especially when it starts in the dark, it's kind of easier to think of it, of like get to sunrise, then get to, the sun up high above you, then get, to the finish. And for this swim, a few hours of darkness, I just kept thinking about the sunrise. And then the sunrise, I kept thinking about, kind of the next landmark. which is really the key bridge and the city limit, and knowing that. And then even within that, I get a signal from my crew every half hour to stop and drink water. So then they throw me 2 water bottles attached to the line. So then I kind of drink and eat like an otter on my back. And the clock ticking, because you're not allowed to touch anyone or anything. So they throw those out. So every half hour, I'm stopping for water and food. And so even within those like bigger time chunks that I think about, it's still like half an hour at a time. And that's a huge thing that a lot of channel swimmers talk about. It's just a half an hour more. Do another half hour and then make a decision. Do a half hour and then talk. So when you're really struggling, I think it's like, okay, one more half hour. I struggle at different times. So like I said, I've done a handful of swims, especially recently. My first English channel, my second English channel, my first Catalina swim. I've done a bunch that started in the dark, and then we work and hopefully finish in the daylight still. And I figured out that when I really think about getting through the dark hours, getting through the night, I'm really looking forward to sunrise. And I feel like I get so excited that the sunrise there. Usually it's so beautiful. Truly, I've seen just some of the most magical sunrises ever. And I figured out that I then get a little sleepy just after that, or even just before. Like, so kind of that dawn to, still early morning, but it's not as, magical to look at anymore. It's still, of course, amazing. But, and then I also notice I get sleepy in the afternoon. So swims that have gone more into the evening, I struggle in that like nap time range,
Yeah.
So some of my training for this swim, and like around in like May and early June, bigger chunks of my training actually went later in the day, and did a lot of that training in like mid afternoon. It wasn't convenient for my schedule at all, but I'm glad I did it because it just gave me a little bit more time with like the sun, in your eyes, the sun like warmer on you. And like kind of starting to teach my brain and my body to be awake, and we're working now, because I think I definitely swim in the morning a lot. I don't swim wildly early morning. I used to. I'm self-employed, so somewhere in the last decade or so, I figured out like, why am I waking up at 5 a.m.? My boss lets me come in at any point.
What a nice boss.
Yeah, and she's separated.
Right? Yeah. We all had a boss like her.
So I figured out like, I can swim at 8 or 9, or I can shift my whole day and swim in the afternoon if I need to like get more comfortable with this time frame. So I think that training was actually really helpful. And even like also in training, when you have especially like a large like yardage load, you're swimming a ton and putting a lot of strain on your body. It's always important. I think I think all endurance athletes think about this as like, how much recovery time do you have from one training session to the next? So some of those days are really helpful because if I swam on a Tuesday morning, by a Wednesday afternoon, that gave me even more recovery time. And then of course, if you swim Wednesday afternoon but Thursday morning hurts just a little bit more. So, and I think there's in training that's helpful too.
So essentially, like, how long is the training process from beginning to end, and does it vary depending on the challenge?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm like building on the base I already have. So really, my year is built on like the season. When I'm doing these big swims is typically May through October, right? So after the season, so really November, December, January, I back way off. I'm not swimming as often or as much. I'm still going to the pool like 3-4 days a week. Really, yeah, definitely 4 or 5 times a week sometimes. And I have amazing swim buddies and training partners too. So it's always, I like seeing my swim friends. so if I'm swimming like 3 to 5 days a week through, November through January, I'm also lifting. So in that stretch of time, I'm usually in the gym a little bit more often. Just kind of also working with my physical therapist, Mary Miller at True Sports, with any kind of rehabbing that might need to happen after the last season, and then some prehabbing, a lot of work on my shoulder health. And so in that time, like lifting in the gym, working with PT more, it's just really about kind of getting back to as strong as I can be, as efficient as I can be. In the pool, I'm swimming less, but really focusing on drills and technique. Just kind of, it's like a good check-in time. And then from, end of January through May, then I'm really ramping up the yardage, spending a lot more time in the pool, adding in more days. So, moving more towards 5-6 days a week. I always have a full rest day off in the week, which I think is really important. And even when I write out my training plan, I'm also taking into account life. So I talk to my, a lot of the swimmers I coach are adults and have jobs and families. And, I think the big thing that gets lost with kind of cookie cutter training plans is life, right? Is how the stress of your job or your family or traveling or how any of those things impact your training, but also your recovery during training. And so I'm a full-time artist as well. And my work is large-scale painting and sculpture. So when I'm in the studio, it's very physical. So there are times that if I have a deadline or, I'm building new canvases, more like in the wood shop, it's physical. So that I usually, when I write out my training plan, I'm also looking at my studio schedule and deadlines. And, if I have to build a bunch of canvases, that are all 8 feet, like that's a huge amount of physical work. So I'm not going to do that in the week that's the heaviest swimming, because I would just be dead. And,
Yeah.
I try to be smart about that. So, and my swimmers that I coach, is, if they're really busy at work or their kid's sick and it just throws off the schedule, same thing. I try to write training plans, and I do this with mine, that there is wiggle room if things need to change. So I try to be as flexible as possible. And I feel like even within my training plan in my week, it's like I'm rarely hitting it 100% of what I planned. But the goal in planning and training is that I am beyond prepared. I'm not overtrained, but I am beyond prepared. And so that there is room for wiggle and changes, and also just the mental toll, I think. Some days, some weeks, I feel like you have to skip a Saturday morning training session and go to brunch with your friends. It's important to be a person, and it certainly takes sacrifices to do the things that you want to do. But it's important to make sure you're still loving it and still enjoying it, and missing out on things makes that hard. So I try to really build in and plan for a balance.
Yeah. And is your whole family supportive of everything you've done? Your husband, your sister, your brother, you mentioned, even your dog, everybody's supportive?
Yes, I definitely figured out over, I've been swimming open water for, 15 years. This kind of marathon to ultramarathon channel distance for, 10, 12 years. I think when athletes are really looking to do this, you need a supportive system around you. I certainly have found my people. My family is definitely supportive. My parents, my brothers, my sisters are always cheering me on. And my friends, I think they get me, which is important. It's certainly some of the things we do, I think, seem crazy, and you need people that normalize you're crazy. And my husband does just that. So my husband and I, we met coaching a youth kids swim team, and he's also a swimmer. He played water polo, and I love swimming with him. He's one of my favorite people to swim with. But he's just down for these adventures. So when I, say, oh, I want to go do this, he's like, yeah, let's do it. which is just the greatest partner in the world. But he also, he's here for the really tough days and the, day that you just need to cry because you're tired and sore and it's hard. My husband Joe also is an amazing home cook, and he keeps me fed all the time. And then when it comes to these swims, he's always my crew chief. So he is the head of the crew. No matter who we're bringing in, friends or family that are crewing for me, whether that means kayaking or prepping my feeds or just being moral support, he's in charge of that team. So he keeps me on track and knows. I mean, he can communicate information just by looking at me. It's like we have really figured out a good system. And in my swims, there's a lot of Katie's rules, including you can't tell me what time it is, you can't tell me how far I've gone or how far I have left to go. If I make a joke, you laugh at it, no matter how bad it is.
Of course.
If I'm going fast, tell me I look fast.
If you're going slow, still say you're going fast, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Never talk about sharks. Never say you are cold. Never say you are hot or tired. And some of these rules have come up because friends have broken them. I'm like, okay,
if there's a rule, there's a reason, right? For that rule.
Yeah. And so, especially when it comes to like time and distance and pace. Like Joe is the only one that's allowed to tell me that. So he also, he'll know when he needs to tell me something. If he has told me, we're going to do 2 more feeds and then hopefully we'll be there, or what that can mean an hour, so that maybe it's 2 miles. So when he tells me info, he knows exactly how that's going to help me. He also knows when to lie to me. But there are certainly times that he's told me something and it turns out that was a lie. Some of my favorite parts of the debrief post swim. Like, oh yeah, we told you it was, mile 17. It was actually mile 15. We wanted you to pick up the pace, and then you just held it. So that was great.
In the end, though, it all worked out, right? After you might have been a little upset, but it worked out.
He'll like stretch time, but won't tell me that. So like I said, I stop every half hour. Even within that half hour, we break up even more. So every half hour, I'm stopping for water and food. I generally try to keep down like 400 calories an hour. For this Baltimore swim, hydration was huge because it was so hot. So I was drinking like somewhere between 12 and 16 ounces of water every time, with either like hydration, electrolytes in it, or like a carb mix. But so within that half hour, I swim 25 minutes at pace, so like kind of at my forever pace. And then I get a signal from the crew, either a sign that says like go or something funny like sprint girl. And at night, it's a spinning glow stick. So that signal at the 25-minute mark is go. And so then I sprint, and I say sprint because obviously when you're hours in, like picking up the pace is not huge. But basically I try to go from like 56, 57 strokes per minute to, maybe 62. So you're kind of cranking a little harder. So I then do 5-minute sprint fast. So we call them pickups. It's like a good mental help, kind of wakes you back up to kind of work that well. If it's cold water, especially, it helps get me a little warmer. And then I get a stop sign. That's literally a stop sign. Or he'll like hold the glow sticks like a flight attendant. And that's the signal to stop, and then they throw the water for a few. But Joe will occasionally stop time. And so instead of a 5-minute pickup or a 5-minute sprint, he'll stretch it to like 7, 8, because he knows when I can hold it that pace longer. But obviously I don't know time. I mean, I have a pretty good idea, and that's part of training too, is I really practice like knowing time really well and just feeling it. You're not allowed to wear watches or anything, so, and I wouldn't want to. But yeah, he'll stretch it when I need it a little bit there. So
Yeah, because I was gonna say, even like I know with running, I may know probably I have an idea what my pace is without even looking at my watch, even though I have a watch. Because I think you
Yeah,
just get so used to it, so it's kind of like a
right.
biological clock.
Yeah.
When you go when you plan one of these, how far out do you plan? Like when from the time you decided to setting it up, and something like Catalina coming up, how do you
Mhm.
reach out to? Do you reach out to like folks in that area, be part of your crew? Does some of your crew travel with you? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, yeah. So some swims, depending on how far in advance you have to book, it can be years. So English Channel tends to book usually 2 years in advance, and you're booking with the boat captain. So swims that already exist, like Catalina, like around Manhattan, like the English Channel, they have a governing body that's running that swim. It's not run like a big event. It's just still you and your boat. Maybe there are other swimmers out that day, but within that organization, there's just a very short list of boat captains that do this. And and that helps to keep that list small because they are experts. It also helps that you're not just hiring any boat to do this, because I think that's how swimmers could be taken advantage of, and put in harm's way. You're really trusting these boat captains with your life. So there's approved pilots, we call them, because they're really starting their course, and they're the thing that books the fastest, right? So for the English Channel, it's 2 years in advance. So they don't even open my boat captain, through the Masterpiece is the name of the boat, and Harry Martle. They open their books for like 2 years in advance on July 1st. Uh, so I'm already booked for my third English Channel, which is next 2025 in end of July. I booked that last year. So Catalina, it's not quite needs to be that far in advance, about a year. So last summer I booked for this upcoming swim. And then other swims are run a little differently too. So Manhattan tends to open in January or time for a swim through the summer. But something like the Bay to Baltimore didn't exist, right? No one had done it before. So there is no larger governing body. So in planning all of those logistics, I mean, it was 8 months in planning, and every day sending emails and phone calls and working out how that was going to go. With swims like the English Channel and Catalina, I do take a crew, either friends or family that are willing to travel, or friends or family that are there in that area. So for Catalina upcoming, we have a friend that lives in the Bay Area in San Francisco, so he'll come down to LA for Catalina, and he crewed my first Catalina swim, Dylan. He also crewed my second English Channel swim. So it's definitely a big, to have friends and family to travel for these swims, and hopefully it's a lot of fun for them. But Catalina, you book a day, right? Only go 2 days, because you start the evening. I'll start the evening of July 28th next week and swim into the afternoon of the 29th. For a swim like the English Channel, you book a tide, and I ended up waiting 10 days to swim because of the wind and weather, and so it's a bigger ask for some swims to get some crew to come with you, and luckily all the crew I've invited has been able to do the swim. But I've certainly known some swimmers that their crew couldn't stay any longer, couldn't wait any longer, and then they had to coordinate more with local swimmers and figure out, can someone come crew for me? Because you certainly can't do these swims without a crew. It's definitely a team sport in that way.
And as far as all the ones you've done, do you have a favorite so far? And was Baltimore it because it was essentially your hometown swim, and the fact that it hadn't been done before?
Yeah, I still feel a bit in shock that it happened.
I mean, you had quite a
Yeah.
crowd out there cheering you on from all the news videos I saw. It's crazy.
Yes. So yeah, typically the swims, it's a couple of my crew. There's always an observer or two on the boat. They're either from the organization. They're from the organization that governs that swim, so they're basically your referees. And then the boat captains, right? So usually it's just a few people cheering when you're like alone on a beach, and then you swim back to the boat and celebrate and move on with celebrating with that, your small crew. State of Baltimore was, the whole city came out, and Marylanders were out, near Annapolis at sunrise. There were people out on the shore. There were people on boats. There were people on paddleboarders. There was news helicopters. It was just the most magical experience ever. And as we got closer and closer into Baltimore, there were just more and more people, and hundreds of people, lining the shores. So it was just unbelievable. And I've been dreaming about a swim here in Baltimore for 20 years, and this swim really started to come into shape in the last few years, and really in the last 8 months or so. And my husband and I, we didn't really know what exactly the swim should be when we started looking at maps and tidal charts and the weather predictions. And I think last December of 2023, Joe and I were looking at tidal charts, looking at maps, and figuring out what should the start point be, how far should the swim be, right? And not only do we want to do this swim, and that I would be the first to do it, but how do we make this grander, right? And celebrate Baltimore and celebrate this huge milestone of swimmable harbor, and then the swim kind of started coming into shape, and months of planning. But the plan to make it grand was also, I wanted to partner with as many organizations here locally as possible. So partnering with the nonprofit Waterfront Partnership, and they have had a huge Healthy Harbor initiative over the last several decades. Partnering with them, you certainly don't need to partner and make a bigger message for any swim. You can just go do the swim slowly, quietly, and not tell anyone. That's fine too. But we really wanted to celebrate their work, and bring attention to their work, bring attention to the improvements in the harbor, and celebrate Baltimore as much as possible. I love the city. I've lived here for nearly 20 years now, and Baltimore needs positive press. It is truly an amazing city, and people that don't live here, people that have never visited, I think there are a lot of misconceptions about this city, and a lot of thoughts that are just stuck in one aisle. And I think the city is so cool and so supportive, and full of art and full of great food and businesses and restaurants, and just so many organizations that care about this city. So to partner with them to make this swim bigger and the grand message was the goal, and it was beyond what I dreamt. So I was hoping people would be at the finish, and Baltimore really showed up.
Yeah. It's definitely on my list of marathons to do. I try to do one destination one every year. And Baltimore's definitely on my list because I fly Southwest a lot. So I go through BWI all the time, but I've never actually spent time in Baltimore. I'm like, I've been in the city probably 1,000 times, but never actually explored the city. So so it'll be on my list. Yeah, definitely.
Great. I'll take you to some of my favorite spots.
Okay. All right. Sounds a deal. So let's see. So beyond swimming, you have a passion for art. So talk about that. Is that something that you always did from college on? Like you always kept that going, no matter what you're doing on the athletic side?
Yeah. So, art has been, my primary career here. And in the last, 10 years, as channel and ultramarathon distance swimming has gotten bigger in my life, the two have gotten more woven together. So now being a full-time artist, and that's, really my primary source of income, and being a professional athlete, I think both of them, they're just so connected for me. Not only in both are, that's how I navigate the world as an artist, as an athlete, as a swimmer, as a painter. But it's also, they're so connected that my work, my painting, my sculpture, I'm really pulling from all of my swimming experiences. So swimming is literally and visually in my work, a lot of blues, a lot of references to open water and pools. More and more images are coming back into my work too. So you're starting to see some swimmers and hands in my work, but really I'm also pulling directly from my experiences. So a lot of my work is really looking at like our fight or flight, our instincts to react to things, and how we deal with stress, right? How we deal with our worries and our anxieties. And really, I think that as adults, we don't think about our imagination all that much, but that's a lot of what anxiety is, right? It's a very real monster we're wrestling with. And in swimming, especially in swimming in the dark, my imagination is constantly playing tricks on me of what is underneath me or what is near me. And I think that's a lot of how we think about anxiety and stress. So in my work, I really try to play with those feelings, but also humor and also playfulness. And because I think humor and lightheartedness and jokes and that's how we deal with a lot of our stress and deal with a lot of our worries. And I think it's even when we're in like the most dark, negative self-talk, in a swim or when you're in a run, it's like making a joke or doing some, finding a little bit of joy is just how you keep turning those arms, right? Keep stepping forward. So in my work, I try to bring in playful colors and, silly titles and things that engage the viewer to address some of those feelings, but also to still navigate them in a not overwhelming way. So I want my work to be powerful and to be, a lot of my work is really large scale, like 8+ feet. So I really want it to consume you and swallow you up when you're standing in front of a big painting, but also have moments that feel approachable and relatable. And so I'm certainly pulling from a lot of my experiences as a swimmer and as an artist, but I really want to leave that door open for the viewer. So my work, I really try, even though I'm pulling from my time in the water and my how I navigate life, I really want the viewer to think of their own experiences, and the work can take them wherever they want to go.
And it sounds like it's about balance in life too, from swimming and your art, balancing it out. Because obviously,
Sure.
mental health plays a huge role in probably the training and you think of the physical aspect of being an athlete, but also the mental aspect of it. And it sounds like art is kind of a mental relief, if you will, with the training, the stresses and all that of the athletic side of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also the way that I approach, what's the best way to train for a swim and what's the, how to navigate the process of that and the emotions that come up through that and how to maintain, positive mental health. I think also with art, it's problem solving, right? There's ways that I want to communicate things. There's work I want to make. What is the best way to share that? What's the best way to make that work? So it is that problem solving all the time. And I think the way I think about large scale work, especially, is physical. I enjoy the physicality of making it, and then I also enjoy and love the way that I can get a viewer to move just by looking at it. That I can draw them to step forward and draw them to step back, and we've been starting to make sculptures that are actually interactive and change your body position as a viewer. But I think the way that my work, it's also just even in my day, I just love how swimming and my studio practice are woven together, and how swimming is just always, and it continues to just influence my work more and more.
Yeah, definitely. And for those interested that are watching and listening, I'll link to your website in the show notes.
Yeah. My website, swimkatie.com, which has all of my swimming info. Hopefully I'll be sharing some, like a write-up from my Bay Baltimore swim and Catalina. They'll also link to katiepumphrey.com, which has all of my work.
Yeah, all right. Would love that. So where do you see yourself in 5 years from now? Still doing these long swims?
Mm.
I guess essentially, is there any swim that you haven't done yet that you still want to do that's on your list?
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk about it, or it's like, oh,
Um,
I don't want to like let anyone know? Yeah.
well, I think I certainly want to
I
do
mean,
the Beta
obviously, like
Baltimore.
Baltimore was close to your heart, and that was one that hadn't been done before. So,
Yeah.
I guess is there another one like that? That
Well,
that
I think
still exists. I mean, I'm sure there always is.
before that, yes, but before I think even really before, because yes, there are things I want to do that I haven't done before. But I love revisiting swims I have done before. I'm getting ready to do Catalina next week for the second time. To revisit swims, I just think is a magical thing. It's always different, like I said, but I think knowing knowing what that experience was already like removes just a little bit of stress and a little bit of the unexpected. So then you can enjoy it a little differently. It's a little more fun. That's really why I love redoing, not redoing, revisiting swims. And with that, so I want to do the Beta Baltimore swim again. I want to do it in a temperature that I planned. So if I would have done the swim in May, the water would have been like mid 60s, maybe even low 60s, which is silly, but I love that temperature. The English Channel, the first time I did it was 60 degrees, which was cold, and I was cold, with a pretty low air temperature, like mid 50s. I think it got up maybe cracked 60 air temperature. My second English Channel swim, it was 64, which, the first one was 2015. My second English Channel was 2022. So 4 degrees warmer is also a bit of my sport is really starting to show climate change now. And Catalina next week, right now the temperature says 68. So that'll be lovely water temperature. My Beta Baltimore swim got up to 82.3 degrees Fahrenheit in the water with 90 degree in the 90s air temperature. It was so hot. I've never been so hot in my life. I'm like hot thinking about it. So I would love to do that swim in May next year, and in a temperature that is more desirable, but also the tide I ended up swimming on was more difficult. So instead of what I would like is that you start the swim with the tide against you. You have a few hours of slack tide and then hours of a bit of a push into the finish. I had the opposite for my swim. So I would love to do this swim again in a more comfortable and safe water temperature and a bit more favorable tide. But I just love the English Channel so much. So I'm excited to do that swim for a third time. And really, I would love to do that swim as many times as I can. So my plan is definitely to swim the English Channel at least every other year,
Yeah.
forever. And, one of the magical things about my sport is that it is a lifelong sport. I know channel swimmers, ultramarathon swimmers that are in their 60s and 70s, and a lot of women especially that are just crushing it. So it's been really a great sport to get into because really I'm on the young side of things at 36, and women really have been just dominating my sport since 1926 when Gertrude Italy became the first woman to swim the English Channel. So it's an amazing sport to be in.
And that's been an important cause to you as well, right? Women in swimming and promoting that fact.
Yeah, absolutely, and encouraging, and more girls to keep playing sports, and being an athlete has shaped me, and I really I love continuing to talk to to young kids and young athletes, and encouraging just being in sports, no matter what sport it is, or if they want to bounce around. I think it's just sports have a way of teaching us so much. They also, I think there's just so many lessons that shape us as people and as collaborators, and so I encouraging youth swimmers to stay in the sport, or just to stay in sports in general, is huge. Yeah, but this Bay to Baltimore swim, I mean, moms and parents from all over the state have been sending me photos of their kids cheering me on, including one 9-year-old girl was out at the sunrise at dawn with binoculars. So, I'm just really excited and honored that I've, inspired, young swimmers, young people, and especially girls to stay in the sport. So I'm really excited to keep chatting with them. And upcoming this in the fall, I'm actually speaking at a bunch of elementary schools. So I'm excited about that.
Is that something you would like to do more in the future? Giving talks like that, like a TED Talks, or even writing a book, maybe about all your experiences?
Yes. All
yes,
of
all. Yes, all the above.
Yes, all.
All right, well, come on.
I love public speaking. Like, I have a sick love for public speaking. So the idea of a TED Talk would be amazing. But yeah, I know. Like, my husband and I, we host trivia for fun. So our trivia regulars know, like, if you give trivia a microphone, you might not get it back.
Then a podcast as well. See, there we go. Your own podcast.
Yeah, gold.
And I also wanted to ask, so after one of these swims, how do you celebrate? Is it dinner, drinks with crew and family? And after, do you want to just be like, I just want to eat everything? Because I know after a marathon, I'm like, all right, I probably burn through 5,000 calories. I want to eat everything and drink everything.
Yes, all of the above.
All of the above there too.
Yeah, I have been celebrating. This swim, I feel like it's weeks of celebrating and more to go. It was just so big. But the funny thing about immediately after the swim is, because yes, it's like I want a beer, I want all of the food, but I'm also like wildly uncomfortable and like swaying still from the water. And I'm usually like my appetite doesn't come back in full for a few days. I think just because your body's so weird, and you've been horizontal for so many hours and swallowing whatever water you're in, and so it's kind of funny when it comes back like raging, and usually then I'm just want all of like the fake. And I did a few days after the Baltimore swim, I did have an amazing, or actually I had a couple of them, but the nice thing about this one though is, so usually with any swim, no matter what body of water, my throat is usually a little irritated after. It's just you're swallowing water that's foreign, and breathing differently for so many hours. But especially with swims like the English Channel and probably with Catalina, usually your tongue and throat get really irritated from salt water. So for the most part, after these big swims, it's hard to eat much, especially the things I want, like salty, crunchy. So I definitely have a tradition of a lot of beer and a lot of ice cream after swims, and like Pedialyte rehydrating. Rehydration is important.
Those are your post-swim vices, beer and ice cream?
Yeah, it's a great.
I second that.
Get into the sport, yeah.
I think that's across all sports, because I feel like after every race is always like a beer garden or beer tent, to go to. It's like, all right, where's the beer? But usually you have to drink at least some water before you get to that beer. I'm like, I can't have a beer right now.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah. Well, Katie, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it. And I look forward to following your whole career and all your future swims. It's exciting to watch.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.